What we're looking at here is our new exhibit for the year is the equipment on a B-17, the Flying Fortress of World War II. This is the actual equipment, and we're most fortunate. This is new equipment. It was never used on a plane. We actually received it in the original boxes. It was surplus. We have all the equipment on a B-17. Well, let's look a little closer at some of this equipment. Down at the bottom here, well, not the B-17, it's the equipment used in a Russian tank, World War II. We manufactured this equipment for the Russians, and I might add the markings, if you can't see too well, are in both English and in Russian. Now, right above it is what I'd like to tell you about. This is the equipment that one would find in a B-17 or the Flying Fortress. The BC 348 receiver, the small command transmitters and receivers. This is a Gibson Girl. It was nicknamed that because of the curves. It's really a very interesting piece of equipment because every life raft on the B-17 carried a Gibson Girl. And what the Gibson Girl is a transmitter. And you turn a crank, and when you turn the crank, it would send out an SOS. This is a frequency meter, the BC-221. I was going to put an SCR-522 in here, but it was rather awkward. We didn't have the room. The B-17 had 3-4 transmitters. This is the main transmitter on the B-17, a BC-375. This transmitter is new, was never in use, and as you can see, they use 50-watt tubes. Many of these transmitters and receivers were used by the radio amateur. They would buy them, I'm talking now in the late 40s and the 50s, and they would convert them over to amateur use. Up above here is some of the accessories that you'd have, the directional finder, the radio compass, and so on. This is an antenna. I didn't believe that the B-17 actually ran out an antenna. Apparently, once they were aloft up in the air, they'd unreel this antenna. Normally, there's a weight here, and they'd let the antenna out for several hundred feet. And then when they were ready to land, they would wind it back up again. So we have all the parts, the components for a B-17. I don't know how well you can see this, but we're looking in the showcase, and what you're looking at right here is an exact replica of Marconi's first coherer receiver. This receiver is the exact design of 1896, 1897. This is the receiver that he demonstrated wireless to the King and Queen of England and to the notables at the time when he was trying to sell wireless or radio to the British government. You may ask, how does a coherer receiver work? Well, don't feel offended because very, very few people know the workings of a coherer. A coherer is a small glass tube full of metal filings, and the coherer is between the antenna and the ground. And when a radio signal comes in, the metal filings will cohere, and when they cohere, they lower the resistance in the circuit. That in turn actuates a relay, and in turn the relay makes a sounder, makes a click, so you can read the code. At the same time, the question comes up, how do you receive another signal if the metal filings are stuck together? Well, a little ball comes up right underneath. You can't see it too well, but a little ball comes up, hits the metal of the glass tube, and knocks the metal filings apart again. So you're ready for another signal. It's sort of an oddball way of receiving signals, but it worked. And this was the first receiver. It was short-lived, however, because by 1903 they had developed the magnetic detector and other forms of detection. But this is the first radio or wireless receiver. This showcase covers the development of the crystal set. And remember, of course, the crystal set was the first receiver for all practical purposes. So we have very early commercial crystal sets, and we have the later types. Of particular interest are these three. These three are very rare and very collectible. We have the Radiola 1, the ER753. Then we have the DeForest counterpart, the DT600. And then we have the wireless specialty set. These three sets are all made about 1921, very rare, and they were crystal sets sold to the consumer, to the public. There are other very rare sets dating even earlier, like loose couplers and so on. What I'd like to show you is this. I just have to see it up here. This is a loose coupler, and that loose coupler was the personal property of Major Armstrong from his estate. As I said earlier, we forever hold Armstrong in high esteem, and anything that belonged to him, to us, deserves recognition. I know you can't see behind that. By the way, these numbers you see in the museum, we do give out to visitors a folded program, and the program tells you where to look for different objects, and they're identified with a number, and that's what this 10 is. But behind the 10 are some very inexpensive Fillmore crystal sets. Fillmore crystal sets sold for $3.95, $4.95, very inexpensive, very cheap, but allowed one to have a receiver. And rather ironical, these crystal sets that used to sell for $3, $4 are now selling for $50 or $100. I guess we call that inflation. Now, what is this strange-looking object? Well, really, you're looking at the oldest piece of equipment in the AWA Museum. This is a house-B static generator, and it's dated 1780. Now, originally, I had dated this in the 1800s. However, one time, Dr. Finn was here from the Smithsonian, and he said, you know, Bruce, you're way off by 100 years on this. This is back in the 1700s. Now, what is it really? It's nothing but a static generator. You turn this crank here. The crank turned this glass cylinder, which rubbed against this felt. And it's like running your feet across the rug in the living room. And you go over and touch the doorknob or something, get a little spark. Well, this did the same thing. You vigorously turn the crank, the glass would go against the felt, generate static electricity, and one can draw a little spark over here. And remember now, in the early days of electricity, that was the only way to generate electricity. You didn't have batteries, you didn't have generators or anything, you had static generators. Of course, the one usually one thinks of is the Windhurst machine. This showcase here is full of DeForest tubes. And immediately when you think of DeForest, you think of the vacuum tube, of course. Down at the bottom here, we have the original DeForest Audions, dating back to 1908, 1910, 1912. Progressively, as we go up the showcase, here's a 1915 tubular DeForest Audion. Now we're in the 1919, 1920 period. We're now into the mid-20s, and at the top we're in 1928, 1930 period. DeForest manufactured tubes for many years. Eventually the company sold out. RCA manufactured DeForest tubes. We're very proud to be able to show all the different versions, the different types of the DeForest tubes. Well, we're looking at some early light bulbs. We're interested in anything relating to electricity or electronics. And of course, the light bulb goes back to the very, very beginning with Thomas Edison, way back there in the 1800s. We have examples of the different light bulbs from the early, very early ones, the bamboo filament, right up until some of the odd tubes of later years. I might add, we also have a nice collection of early motors, small motors, dynamotors,